Today, on Energy Contact, energy falls upward in us like steam over a boiling pot. It creates spirit, emotion, feeling, unseen things. So what is it that drips back down? Well, it's your body, your physical self, and how you look, how you act, how you think, and how you feel is just a function of what vaporizes and condenses. So, if you can chill out for the next half hour, we're going to take a look at a few things worth getting steamed up over. It's coming up right now on Energy Contact. Hello, and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to the production staff here in the studio for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series I'm presenting to you as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a new way of seeing yourself, and a new way of seeing the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making an energetic contact with yourself internally and with your environment. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. There is something about us that loves to categorize and classify. Take these little things out, take one little cell out, look at it under a microscope, and try to figure out things from there. But in fact, all that health and growth and self-improvement that we're talking about take place when we do just the opposite. It happens when we put these things together, when we make an energetic contact between the physical world and the unseen one. We're presenting on these programs a brand new paradigm that's thousands of years old. We're presenting extraordinary topics for ordinary people. And let's move forward with that. Let's bring up our slide. Everyone, please know that I am not a doctor. This show is not a medical advice show. It's not a medical talk show. It is not a medical anything show. Now, I might call myself an energy healer or a chakra healer, things like that. So might a lot of people. So might you if you came to me. But state, federal, and local governments call me no such thing at all. And it's very important that you understand that. There's a lot of important information on your screen right now. Please, if you will, read that thoroughly. Give it your full attention. But when you've got it down, now would be a great time to go locate a pencil and paper. Now here's why you want to do that. At the end of this program, we're going to run some credits, and on those credits there's going to be contact information for me. Now I invite and encourage you to contact me. I'm sort of hoping that something I have to tell you today might inspire you to want to do that. But in order to contact me, you're going to need that contact information. In order to get that, you're going to need a pencil and paper. There will be plenty of time to jot that down when the credits roll, if you have your pencil and paper ready. So please go get those now. All right, let's come back here. Today's show is show number 57. If you're tuning in for the first time today, well, thanks and welcome. I think you'll enjoy the show. These shows are sequential. They build. We're talking about things that we introduced and explained previously. We're talking about them today. However, I'm doing my very best to catch you up. There's some ramp-up things, some up-to-speed things you will have missed out on, but I'm reviewing and covering things, I believe, well enough to keep you in the loop today. So you'll enjoy the show. If what you see piques your interest, and if it is one of your first times joining me, well then I'll invite you to look around, because there will be earlier shows airing at later times. They'll either be re-airing right here on this channel, or they'll be on at different days, in different times, in different areas. And if you look for them, I'll appreciate it. All right, and now's the time of the show where I get to introduce my co-star to you. Let's get Slim on camera. This is my buddy Slim. And Slim is here for a reason. Since we're investigating what it is that energy contacts in the physical self, we have to understand a couple of things, don't we? We have to know something about energy. And this show is certainly a program about energy. But all that energy out there somewhere in some abstract place does us no good at all. Slim is here to help us understand that thing that the energy contacts. Remember, a body without energy is just a corpse. An energy without a body, well, it might be a number of cool things, but none of them are human. All right. Previously on Energy Contact, we have been discussing flows, haven't we? We've been talking about pipelines and channels within our body and the things that flow through them. You know, when we were little kids in school, we were taught that our bodies were these individual hunks of mass. Not only were we separate from one another, but we were separate from ourselves. We were a body separate from our own emotions, our own feelings, our own spirit. It's a pity we were told that. But on Energy Contact, we're learning to see ourselves a little differently, a lot more accurately, in fact. We're learning to see ourselves the way Einstein saw us, as frequencies and vibrations, rhythms and pulses, as energetic forces and energetic flows. Now, anything that flows has a current, like a river does, or like electricity does. And currents, they can shock us, they can carry us away, they can overwhelm us, they can even kill us. But on the other hand, they can also be controlled, manipulated, wielded into things that we can use for our benefit. So while all these forces that are rolling around in us are invisible, they manifest themselves in very visible ways. They metabolize into the physical us. In fact, it is very difficult, if not completely impossible, to become a spiritual person until and unless we promote the flow of invisible energy through our physical structure. And we've looked at the pipes and the paths that energy goes through in order to accomplish that. We saw all these vertical channels recently, haven't we? We saw a spine, a caduceus, that's that medical symbol. We saw a distillation column. We saw a sushumna nadi, all sort of doing the exact same thing. And we've also seen acupuncture meridians and acupuncture points and reflexology points. Energy starting at one place and going to another place. How does it get there? Via paths, via channels, via pipelines. We've been looking at a few other things too. We have seen how today's science is just yesterday's mysticism. How old mystics discovered things millennia ago that science has just quote-unquote discovered as recently as the late 20th century. So it just stands to reason that what we're calling mystical today will be elementary science a generation or two from now. We've seen other things too. We've seen that body intellect. We've been looking at that a lot. How those same materials that give us thought, memory, reason, recall, intellect, logic, all those things that we have always thought of as brain functions, how they are in fact in every cell of our body. They permeate every cell of our body. We build everything into that body intellect, and then that body intellect just vaporizes and condenses it and refluxes it back into us. And we've spoken a little bit too about another invisible force, a mysterious energy that those old Indian mystics called Kundalini energy. And now we're starting to understand what all this has to do with how we look, how we act, how we think, and how we feel. So today, we're just continuing on this. We're continuing to look at those invisible but very real pipelines within us. And we're looking at what flows through those pipes. And we're looking at the stops and the nodes and the checkpoints, the things along those pipelines that either stop or facilitate these energy flows. So what goes up must come down. What vaporizes must condense. Isaac Newton told us those things. But Newton also told us about entropy, about things that fall apart. And he told us about energy that somehow falls up. And so with all these energies and all these frequencies and all these motions going on in all these different directions, sometimes things happen in ways that make it difficult for us to see or understand the connection between them. Well, that's what our show is about today then. Understanding all these physical and energetic goings on and what they have to do with each other. And what all that has to do with your health, your growth, your self-improvement, your realization of your full potential. We want to understand all of those energies that flow upwards in us and how they change on their journey and how they change us on their journey. So we're looking at things like chakras and auras and Kundalini energy, all those words that people like to bandy about. But remember, while we want to understand these energy flows, it doesn't do us a lot of good if we don't understand the channels, the pipes through which they pass. So that's where we're headed today. A lot of stuff going on. But first, everybody stop if you're in a place you can do it and close your eyes for a second. Take a deep breath, because we have reached the part of our show where we get to take a break and take our virtual field trip, our journey in our mind's eye. Today, for our field trip, visualize that you are at my house and I get a phone call from a friend of mine in Europe. And I say over the phone, "Oh, hey, it's so good to hear your voice." And I say to you, "Oh man, this connection is great. Her voice sounds so clear." But you surprise me, because you reply back to me, "That's not her voice. How could that be her voice? That's some sort of replica of it. That's not her." And I say, "Oh yeah?" I say, "But it's her. It sounds like her. It's got her inflections. It's got her personality, her memory. How could it not be her?" You're insistent. You say, "Well, technically, it cannot be her. If she were 3 blocks from your house yelling at the top of her lungs, you would not be able to hear her. How can you hear her from halfway around the world?" I'm equally as obstinate. I say, "Look here. I heard a voice. This very voice that she has all the time. If it was not a voice I heard, what was it? And if it wasn't her voice, well then whose was it? And if I could make contact with her, why do the technicalities even matter?" All right, hold that thought. Yesterday's mysticism is today's science. We've been looking at that on Energy Contact. And today's mysticism is just science that we haven't figured out yet. You know, there's nothing wrong with that at all. The only thing wrong is that we tend to get so sanctimonious and condescending about it all. We've been looking at homologs over the past few shows of Energy Contact. And the purpose of that is to attach things that some would call mystical or abstract to practical, ordinary things, things that are easier to understand, in order to understand the practical applications of more esoteric things. Now, the word homolog is a word that we don't use every day. So let's bring up a slide. We'll take a peek at it real quick. Here's a definition of homolog on your screen. Things that are homologous, that's the adjective form, they correspond to each other. For example, the front leg of a dog, or the arm of a human, and the flipper of a seal. You can use one thing to describe another thing. Let's go immediately to our next slide, and you'll see an example of a homolog. Here are 2 things that look exactly alike, but they're very, very different. On one side of your screen is an atom, infinitesimally small. And on the other side is the enormous solar system. By the way, you see all those concentric circles on your screen? They aren't really there in the physical sense at all. They're just there to show an invisible thing, the path over which those things travel. Now, for examples, if you were describing either one of those things on your screen, you could use the other one as an example to explain it. For example, the set of magnetic attractions and repulsions that keep those dots into their places. The same thing that keeps Jupiter from bumping into Mars or flying off out into the cosmos somewhere is the same thing that keeps one electron from bumping into the other one, or doing the same thing. We're learning that the universe is just a system of these things, things that are made in the image and likeness of other things. They're homologs. All right, let's come back. So some things that look different are the same, and some things that look exactly the same are in fact very different. And 1 billion different people can look at the exact same thing, but they will see 1 billion different objects. All right, so what does this have to do with energy pipelines? Especially energy pipelines in our bodies? Well, plenty. We are seeing that energy rises up like steam in us, and it refines on the way up. Which brings us to the topic of distillation. If you were to ever be out in the country and pass by a moonshine still, or if you were ever out in an industrial area and passed by one of those huge oil refineries, what you would see is basically an elaborate version of what we're going to bring up on your screen right now. Let's pull up that slide. This is a distillation apparatus, and that's about all there is to it. It's about all there is to a moonshine still or an oil refinery. A distillation apparatus, we commonly know that as a still. Now pay close attention to that vertical column there on each side. Here's how distillation works. We start with a raw material, a crude ore, dirty stuff. That's the liquid that's in that little pot on the left side of both of those pictures. But also in that pot is good stuff. And when we heat that pot, everything in there turns to steam. And that steam rises up that column. It's called a fractionating column. Remember, there's no difference between the liquid in the pot and the steam in the column. It's just the same thing in different form. Just like mass and energy are the same thing in different form. But as that steam rises up, the good stuff separates from the lousy stuff, and it refines. Thousands of manufactured goods that we use every day, they're either made or they're processed using variations of this very, very simple distillation process. That fractionating column, as we saw last week, is a homologue to the spine. But that's not all that we've got steaming up. Let's go to our next slide. It's also a homologue to something else. Here you see that fractionating column and you see the spine, but what's that other thing there? Well, if you've been watching, you know that's something called the Sushumna Nadi, and those circles on it are things called chakras. We are refining and processing energy up these columns, and we've talked a lot about that distillation column and that spine, and if you believe ancient wisdom, that is exactly what Kundalini energy wants to do in that Sushumna Nadi, in you right now. But unlike the spine and the fractionating column that you see on this picture, look at that Sushumna Nadi and you'll notice that it has a base to it. Let's come back here. We're about to take a look at that. All right, another thing that we talk about a lot on Energy Contact is our physical structure. All that energy stuff and chakra stuff makes no sense to us if we can't bring it into contact with something. Well, we're going to get Slim to help us understand what it is that Energy Contacts. Since the very first programs of Energy Contact, we have been looking at our main horizontal and vertical structures. Let's take a look at that on Slim. We'll turn Slim back around here a little bit. And you can see, like us, Slim is a vertical creature. He's about 5'7" tall, but he's only a foot or so around. Now, some of us have a little more girth than that. But basically, we're vertical creatures. Slim has main horizontal structures, and they are his feet, his pelvis, and his shoulders. And he has main vertical structures, and they are his legs and his spine. Now, far and away, in terms of anatomy and in terms of Kundalini energy, the most crucial of these structures, the most important, are the pelvis and the spine. Okay, so let's bring this back to distillation, and we'll go right back to our slides again. Let's bring up our next slide. We've seen that the fractionating column, all these things that you see here are just different examples of them, they're homologous to the spine. Those vertical columns have individual little sections in there though. Can you see those? Those are the sections that the steam has to rise through. And they're just like vertebrae. They're homologous to vertebrae. Now that's the vertical part, but it doesn't stop there. What about the horizontal part? Well, let's go to our next slide. We've often referred to our pelvis as our bowl of guts. We've seen that it's the core of us in so many ways, and we're going to come back to that later. But for now, can you see that there's a pelvis in our distillation setups too? Look at the shape of those two bowls there on the left of your screen. They're vertical creatures too, but they've got a horizontal structure. And it's more than just a coincidental resemblance. Let's come back here. I'm in the process of telling you that all those things in the pictures that you just saw, they're just about the same. They're all examples of each other. Okay, so here is another, see if I get this out, show you another thing here. Here is another distillation setup here. Remember in the distillation setup we saw, there's a pot below, and in that pot there's crude ore, dirty stuff. But it's got good stuff in it too. And when we heat it, it rises up. Rises its way up this column. And then it kind of condenses and drips back down, and it rises up and it drips back down, and this goes on forever. This is a distillation setup too. But here's another twist. The crude stuff that we're distilling is earth energy. If you're making moonshine, it might be corn. If you're making oil or gasoline, it might be crude oil. But corn, oil, most of those things, they come from the earth. We take them from the earth and we throw them from the pot. And guess what? That's what's going on here. All righty. Put my spine down for a second. Those old yogis didn't know anything about distillation, or at least they probably didn't. But you know what? They wouldn't have been very surprised if you told them about it. They were just sitting around in the woods, meditating in their cross-legged position. We'll look at why they did that more pretty soon. But for now, we're going to look at that why they sat like that, where that cross-legged position came from. What those old mystics wanted to do was bring energy up from the earth. And they knew that the bottom of their core had to touch the earth in order to do that. That they had to physically touch the earth in order to move invisible energy. But they knew that even if they could make that contact, that energy would be crude energy stuck in the distillation pot, stuck in the pelvis, crude and useless, unless they could somehow purify it up their spine, or more accurately, up their Sushumna Nadi. Whew, all righty. We're starting to understand a few things about what we call earth energy, aren't we? But all of a sudden, we find ourselves talking a little bit less about pelvises and spine, and a little bit more about that homologous Sushumna Nadi. Let's explain it like this. Every single person born starts out with some of what we'll call, for right now, Kundalini energy potential. And it's crude, but it is powerful. And it can potentially empower you to do just about anything. And in its crude form, it is absolutely useless, lame and latent and dormant. Unfortunately, in about 99.999999% of people, that's exactly the way it remains from cradle to grave, and perhaps across many, many lifetimes if you believe in that sort of stuff. What we want to understand is what to do to be in that 0.000000001%. Now that brings us to mind the expression, many are called, but few are chosen. You know, I'm not really sure how many are called, but I do know that of those who are, not a lot of people figure it out. Not a lot of people solve the puzzle. And I think it is a puzzle by design. So if we want to figure it out, we've got to do something. And we have to do something that a lot of other people are either unable or unwilling or unaware of doing. Now, one of the great things about living in a universe where body, mind, spirit, emotion, intellect, ego, where they're all the same thing, is that every topic ties to every other topic. They're all the same. There are no different topics. Way back, we did a bunch of shows on all the stuff that is in our core, our pelvises, and how crucial it is to liberate our core. We haven't been there in a long, long time, but our road to understanding Kundalini energy is leading us back to that place, to understand the importance of energy falling upwards in us, steaming upward in us, and what we have to do to control that process. Now, we don't have time to get into all the details of our core today. That's for a later show. But if you'll recall, we saw that that core is all about that horizontal pelvis. And we saw that the way that energy began at the core and fell up, well, it was that part of us, it's the part of us that controlled survival, breath, power, fear, the flight or fight response, or more specifically, fight, flight, or freeze response, balance, all sorts of things, all at our core. The physical part of us has something to do with the movement, with the motion of spirit and energy. And this is why it is very difficult, if not absolutely impossible, to be a spiritual person unless we know how to promote the flow of invisible energy through our physical structure. It's all a part of that distillation-like energy purifying process. People talk about evolving like it's some sort of abstract thing, but it's grade school science. It's elementary chemistry and physiology. So those old yogis must have understood a little bit more about chemistry and physiology than we give them credit for. All right, let's bring up another slide, because we've spoken some today about the distillation apparatus and about the spine, but let's get to the third thing over here. The Sushumna Nadi. There's that medical symbol thing, the thing you've seen before, the caduceus and the Sushumna Nadi. We've seen that these are models of the same thing too. That Sushumna Nadi is that vertical pole there. Now you can't really draw a picture of a nadi or a chakra because they're not physical things, just like you can't really draw a picture of those orbit lines that those planets were on. All we can do is draw a representation, a model. That vertical pole on either side of your screen you want to look at is the Sushumna Nadi. It doesn't matter which one you look at because they're homologous to each other. But there are two more nadis. They are the Ida and the Pingala. On the caduceus, you see them represented as snakes. Over on the other side, they're a little harder to see. They're those little blue and reddish circles over there. Now those snakes start at the base and shimmy upwards. And earthy energy shimmers upwards in us, just like those snakes do. Both of those pictures, the left and the right there, also show something else. They show 7 crossing points. And those circles on them are chakras. All right, let's come back up here. So that's that. I'm going to bring my spine up here. We have to overcome all sorts of blocks and obstacles to get things up that Sushumna Nadi, don't we? So here's all that stuff down here, and those chakras sit in here and they block the way. When we achieve it, when we get up to the top, we've achieved something pretty cool. Because when we get up here, we've seen something else. We can't see it on my spine model, but up top here, there's a brain. You can see it on Slim, and hopefully you can see it on yourself. And just like the crude ore we discussed doesn't work right if it's not properly refined and distilled, and just like you can't make moonshine out of corn squeezins if you don't distill it right, and just like Kundalini energy is useless if you can't properly bring it up the pipeline, well, a brain doesn't do us much good if you haven't activated it properly. Don't believe me? Just look at the world that is operated now by the 99.9999%. All right, so that's what we're looking at, Kundalini energy, and we'll look at it more next time. We're looking at physical things and energetic things, but what matters is where the energy contacts the physical self. I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life in energy contact.